Emma Carter stood at the sleek marble counter of the Foster Memorial Private Hospital, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly as she struggled to keep her voice steady. "Please," she said, glancing at the receptionist, who barely met her eyes. "I just need to see the nurse. I'm feeling something's wrong." Behind her, patients and visitors shuffled through the bright lobby, stealing glances at the commotion without pausing their conversations. Ryan Foster, her husband, leaned casually against a nearby pillar, tapping his expensive watch with 2 fingers. His tailored suit looked like it belonged to someone about to close a major business deal, not accompany his wife through a medical emergency. "Emma," he called out sharply, not bothering to walk over. "You're fine. Stop making a scene." Emma's cheeks flushed as she turned back to the receptionist. "Please," she whispered, louder this time, voice cracking. The young woman behind the desk shifted uncomfortably and looked down at her computer, pretending to type. A sharp, sudden cramp ripped through Emma's abdomen, and she gasped, doubling over slightly. One hand gripped the counter, knuckles white. Murmurs floated from the seating area as a few people turned to stare more openly now. Emma's breathing grew shallow. "I need a nurse," she said, louder, desperate. Ryan stepped forward finally, fixing the administrator with a cold smile. Leaning, in close enough that Emma couldn't hear, he hissed, "Cancel her nurse. She's faking it. Don't reward this behavior." His voice, dripping with contempt, left no room for discussion. The administrator faltered, glancing at Emma, then at Ryan's gleaming Rolex. A small nod, barely noticeable, confirmed her decision. No nurse was called. No help was coming. Emma, wide-eyed and sweating, looked around the lobby. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. A man in a suit coughed awkwardly. A woman tugged her child closer, as if witnessing something shameful. No one moved to help. Behind the desk, Linda, the young trainee, watched everything unfold. Her hands hovered over the phone, hesitating. Her supervisor caught her eye and shook her head almost imperceptibly. Linda swallowed hard, her fists clenching at her sides, but she stayed silent. Emma tried to straighten up but stumbled, clutching her belly as another contraction racked her body. She cried out softly, a sound so raw it cracked through the polished atmosphere like a dropped glass. Still, no one moved. Ryan's phone buzzed. Without sparing her a second glance, he turned toward the exit, already typing a message back. His polished shoes clicked smartly against the marble floor as he strode away toward the valet stand. Emma tried to follow him, staggering a few steps before collapsing onto her knees. The lobby blurred around her. Her breathing was ragged, her arms shaking as she tried to brace herself against the cold, unfeeling floor. Somewhere above her, she heard hushed voices, the shuffling of feet, but still no helping hand. Linda's nails dug into her palms as she watched the scene. Her trainer's voice warned her again with a subtle shake of the head. "Not your business. You're just a trainee. Stay out of it." Emma squeezed her eyes shut against the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal. People moved past her as if she were invisible, just an unfortunate inconvenience they had to step around. The receptionist turned away. A security guard looked the other direction. Not even a chair was offered. A valet attendant opened the glass doors for Ryan outside. He didn't even glance back. His car, a sleek black sports model, purred as he slid into the driver's seat without a second thought. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys like Emma's. Your support helps us share stories that deserve to be heard. Inside the lobby, Emma made one last attempt to rise. Her hand slipped on the marble and she fell back down, gasping, her hospital bracelet catching the light as she reached out uselessly. The murmuring crowd thickened near the exit doors, everyone too polite or too cowardly to intervene. Linda couldn't take it anymore. Her heart hammered in her chest as she shifted her weight from foot to foot, her instincts screaming to act. She glanced once at her supervisor, then at Emma's crumpled figure. Biting her lips so hard she tasted blood, she stepped out from behind the counter. Just then, a sharp voice from behind snapped her back. "Linda, not your place. Step back now." Tears welled in Linda's eyes, but she froze, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Emma opened her eyes, her vision swimming. She looked toward the counter where Linda stood frozen, their gazes locking briefly. Emma's lips trembled in a silent, pleading smile, full of quiet hope and resignation. Linda's chest ached with the weight of it, but she obeyed, stepping back mechanically behind the counter as instructed, her face burning with shame. Ryan's car pulled away from the hospital entrance, disappearing into the thick afternoon traffic without a backward glance. Emma remained kneeling in the center of the gleaming lobby, alone, trembling, as the world moved around her like she was invisible. The hospital security camera blinked quietly, overhead, recording every second. The scene froze, Emma's vulnerable figure etched into the sterile, uncaring lobby. Emma's hand slipped on the marble as she tried to brace herself again, but this time she collapsed fully, her body folding into itself near the edge of the reception desk. A soft, broken cry escaped her lips as she curled protectively around her belly, her hospital gown bunching awkwardly. The sound was so raw that it pierced the polished silence of the lobby, making several heads turn. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Linda couldn't stand it anymore. Her supervisor's warnings faded into the background as instinct took over. She darted around the counter, ignoring the sharp hiss of her name being called back. Kneeling down beside Emma, Linda pulled out her own phone with shaking hands and quickly dialed 911. Her voice urgent but steady as she gave the dispatcher the hospital's address and explained the emergency. Outside, Ryan leaned against his sleek black car, watching the growing commotion through the glass doors. Seeing Linda, crouched beside Emma, calling for help, made his jaw clench. He shoved his phone into his pocket and stormed back toward the entrance, his voice slicing through the lobby like a whip. "Don't touch her," he barked. "She's just looking for attention. She's embarrassing herself." The receptionist flinched at the noise. Several guests stood up from their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. A mother covered her young daughter's ears. Whispered conversations buzzed under the high ceiling, a thick cloud of judgment rising against Ryan with every second he kept shouting. Linda ignored him. She squeezed Emma's hand lightly, murmuring soft reassurances as she checked her breathing. Emma's skin felt clammy, and her breaths came in short, shallow gasps. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple as she gritted her teeth against another contraction. A security guard approached, looking unsure. He glanced from Ryan's furious face to Linda's determined one, then quietly backed off without intervening. An older nurse, hearing the noise, hurried over from down the hallway. Her eyes widened at the sight of Emma collapsed on the floor. Without waiting for authorization, she knelt on the other side of Emma and pulled out a stethoscope from around her neck, nodding approvingly at Linda's 911 call already in progress. "Help is on the way," Linda whispered, squeezing Emma's hand again. Emma's eyes fluttered weakly open, focusing on Linda's face with a look that was equal parts fear and gratitude. Ryan stood just inside the entrance now, his fists clenched, his face a deep, angry red. "You're making a scene," he spat, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Get up, Emma. Stop humiliating us." The lobby had turned into a stage. Every guest, every staff member not actively helping, stood frozen, watching the drama unfold. With wide eyes, phones started to appear, subtle flashes indicating that videos were being recorded. Someone whispered, "Isn't that Ryan Foster?" Another voice replied, "That's his pregnant wife. What's he doing?" The weight of public judgment shifted palpably. Where there had been hesitation before, now there was outrage brewing in the whispered undercurrent. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The hospital's front doors burst open, and a team of EMTs rushed in, pushing a stretcher between them. Linda stepped back, allowing them to surround Emma, who was barely conscious now, murmuring incoherent words. One of them Ryan's name. One EMT, a tall woman with calm, professional movements, shot Ryan a disgusted look before focusing entirely on Emma's vitals. The nurse who had knelt beside Emma briefed the team quickly, her voice clipped and efficient. Ryan, sensing the shift in atmosphere, straightened his jacket and turned back toward his car without another word. His pace was brisk, his face carefully blank as he adjusted his cufflinks, pretending the whole scene didn't concern him. Behind him, guests openly stared, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Emma, now strapped securely onto the stretcher, whimpered as she was lifted from the ground. Her hand reached out weakly toward the glass doors, toward the shrinking figure of Ryan as he walked away. "Ryan," she whispered, so soft that only Linda heard it. The EMTs moved quickly, wheeling her toward the ambulance parked at the curb. As they maneuvered through the lobby, Linda fell into step beside them for a few seconds, unable to resist staying close. Emma's eyes fluttered open briefly again, finding Linda's. A faint, broken smile touched her lips before she slipped into unconsciousness. At the curb, Ryan's car revved aggressively as he climbed inside. Several guests standing outside instinctively stepped back from the noise and dust kicked up by his tires. A few pointed phones in his direction, capturing everything as he peeled away into traffic without so much as a glance back. Linda stood, there, watching, her hands trembling at her sides. Around her, the lobby buzzed with angry murmurs. "What kind of man leaves his pregnant wife like that?" someone muttered. "Did you see her? She could barely breathe." Another added. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and within seconds the flashing lights sped away down the avenue, carrying Emma into the unknown. Linda wiped her hands against her uniform skirt, fighting back tears. She knew she had broken protocol. She knew there would be consequences. But somewhere deep in her chest, under the weight of everything she had just witnessed, a quiet voice told her she had done the right thing. No woman deserved to be left like that. No life deserved to be treated as disposable. As the lobby slowly returned to its sterile normalcy, the security cameras continued to blink silently overhead, recording the collapse of appearances, the cracks in power, the birth of something much stronger than fear. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Emma lay curled on a narrow hospital bed, wrapped in a scratchy blanket that smelled faintly of antiseptic. The public emergency hospital was a far cry from the pristine luxury of Foster Memorial. But here, at least, the nurses moved quickly, efficiently, and with genuine concern. A kind older woman had adjusted Emma's IV and spoken to her gently, asking no unnecessary questions. Still, even in this safer place, the humiliation lingered, clinging to her like a second skin. Every time a nurse entered, Emma braced herself, half expecting another rejection, another cold glance. But it didn't come. Only kindness, muted and professional. Outside her room, the low hum of hospital life continued. Carts rattled past. Voices murmured over intercoms. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Emma stared at the ceiling, her hand resting lightly on her belly, feeling the faint, reassuring flutter of life inside. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. The door creaked open quietly. Linda slipped inside, a small bouquet of grocery store flowers clutched awkwardly in her hand. She paused, hesitating, then stepped closer to the bed. Her uniform was gone. She wore jeans and a simple sweatshirt now, trying to blend into the background. Emma managed a weak smile. "I'm not supposed to be here," Linda said softly, setting the flowers on the side table. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but the lump in her throat made it impossible. She simply nodded, the gesture small but full of meaning. Linda hesitated, then reached out and gently squeezed her hand once before letting go. In the hallway, a television mounted high on the wall flickered with the evening news. Snippets of voices floated into the room, the words blurring together at first, until a few stuck out clearly. Millionaire. Ryan Foster under fire after shocking video emerges. Linda stiffened. Emma turned her head toward the sound. The footage played on the screen, grainy but unmistakable. Ryan standing stone-faced as Emma crumpled to the ground inside Foster Memorial's gleaming lobby, his impatient gestures, his sharp words caught by an onlooker's phone microphone. The way he turned away, ignoring her as she cried out. The anchor's voiceover hammered it home. Social media outrage is growing after witnesses filmed Ryan Foster abandoning his pregnant wife during a medical emergency. Many are calling for boycotts of Foster Industries, and legal experts are speculating about possible negligence claims. Linda moved to the doorway, peeking into the hall. Half a dozen nurses and visitors stood watching the broadcast, shaking their heads in disbelief. Emma turned her face into her pillow, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation crash over her. She wasn't just a private embarrassment anymore. She was a headline. Linda returned to her side. "You didn't deserve that," she said quietly, her voice firm. "None of this is your fault." Emma closed her eyes, breathing in slow, measured beats. The baby kicked gently under her hand, reminding her that giving up was not an option. Later, after Linda left to avoid drawing attention, Emma lay awake, the glow of the television from the hall still flashing faintly across her ceiling. A pair of suited men sat nearby in the waiting room, speaking in hushed tones that carried clearly through the thin walls. "Neglect lawsuit's a slam dunk," one of them was saying. "Public footage, eyewitnesses, hospital records. He's finished." "Yeah, but she needs to act fast," the other replied. "Once Foster's PR machine kicks in, they'll bury it under countersuits and silence." Emma listened, heart pounding. The thought of facing Ryan's legal team, his money, his power, was terrifying. But another thought pushed forward, quiet but persistent. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. In the soft shadows of her small, shared room, Emma's mind began to trace new paths, fragile, but growing stronger with each passing second. The door opened again. A nurse walked in, checking her monitors, but her presence was warm, unhurried. She smiled at Emma, a real smile, and for the first time since collapsing in that polished lobby, Emma felt something like hope stir inside her. The next morning, the flowers Linda had left sat proudly on the bedside table, a splash of color against the sterile walls. Emma reached for them, running her fingers lightly over the petals. A small, handwritten note was tucked inside the bouquet. "You are stronger than they know. Don't forget it." Linda Emma pressed the card to her chest, her eyes blurring with fresh tears. But this time, they weren't tears of humiliation or despair. They were something closer to determination. In the hallway, a newscaster's voice floated through the open door. More fallout today as sponsors distance themselves from Ryan Foster following viral footage of his treatment toward his pregnant wife. Legal experts predict mounting lawsuits and potential financial ruin if settlements are not reached swiftly. Emma sat up slowly, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Her body still ached, but her mind felt clearer than it had in days. She wasn't invisible anymore. They had tried to dismiss her, silence her, step around her pain like it was inconvenient. But the world had seen, and for once, the world wasn't looking away. The nurse came in again, helping her adjust her IV. "You're doing better today," she said kindly. "You've got a strong little fighter in there." Emma smiled faintly. "Yeah," she murmured. "We're both fighters." Outside her window, the city moved on, indifferent to the individual lives it carried along. But for Emma, something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just surviving, she was preparing. She glanced once more at Linda's flowers, their colors stubbornly bright against the dull hospital light, and tucked the note safely into the drawer beside her bed. The next time she stood in front of Ryan Foster, she wouldn't be the one trembling. The next morning brought no calm. A courier arrived at the emergency hospital with a thick envelope, his face politely blank as he handed it to the nurse on duty. She brought it into Emma's room hesitantly, almost apologetically, placing it on the tray at the foot of her bed. Emma stared at it for a long moment before reaching out with trembling fingers. Her name was typed neatly across the front, stark and impersonal. Inside were divorce papers. The letter attached was brief and brutal. Ryan Foster was seeking an immediate dissolution of marriage on grounds of conduct causing reputational damage. The words felt like ice cutting across her skin, as if everything that had happened, her pain, her humiliation, her abandonment, had been her fault. She flipped through the pages mechanically. Legal jargon, financial threats, demands that she sign quietly and accept minimal support. Emma placed the papers back down, her hands shaking. A lump rose in her throat, but she forced it down. She reached for the hospital phone and, after hesitating, dialed Ryan's number from memory. The line rang once, twice, then transferred to his assistant's sharp-clipped voice. "This is Ms. Grant. Mr. Foster is unavailable," she said coolly. "I need to speak to him," Emma said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Please, just a few minutes." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Ms. Grant replied without missing a beat. "All communication should go through legal channels from now on." Before Emma could say anything else, the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside her window, the gray sky pressed heavily against the glass. Inside, Emma sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, the weight of abandonment settling over her like a second blanket. There was no one coming to save her. No apology on the way. No sudden change of heart. Linda appeared a few hours later, carrying 2 cups of cheap hospital coffee. She set one down on Emma's bedside table and sat in the plastic chair by the window. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched the rain smear across the glass, the city beyond blurred and gray. "He sent divorce papers," Emma said finally, her voice low. Linda didn't look surprised. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Emma laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "He says I humiliated him." Linda shook her head. "He humiliated himself. Everyone saw it." Emma's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby shifted under her palm, a quiet, living reminder that she wasn't alone. That she had someone who needed her to stay strong, no matter how much she wanted to curl up and disappear. Linda leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I have a friend," she said carefully. "A lawyer. She works with women who've been abandoned, mistreated, especially when there's abuse involved. She might be able to help you." Emma turned to look at her wary. "I can't afford a lawyer." "She works pro bono for cases like this," Linda said. "She's good, and she's angry, the right kind of angry." Emma hesitated. Fighting back meant more exposure, more public scrutiny. It meant dragging everything out into the open where it could be twisted and used against her. Part of her just wanted to disappear quietly, sign the papers, and be done. But then she thought of Ryan, sitting comfortably in his glass office, protected by lawyers and money and power, rewriting the story to make himself the victim. She thought of how easily he had walked away while she screamed for help. How quickly he had decided she was disposable once she became inconvenient. Emma's jaw tightened. Without speaking, she reached for the pen on her tray table and clicked it open. Linda pulled a second folder from her bag and placed it beside the divorce papers. A legal response prepared by her friend, clean and professional. All Emma had to do was sign. Her hand hovered over the paper for a long moment. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about hurting Ryan back. It was about standing up and saying, I existed. I mattered. You cannot erase me because it's easier. For you. Emma signed. The finality of the motion settled deep in her bones, strangely grounding. She handed the folder back to Linda, who gave her a small, proud nod. Outside, the rain had slowed to a fine mist. The city blurred and shifted behind the wet glass, but the storm inside Emma's chest had quieted just a little. She sat back against the pillows, breathing deeply, her body still aching, but her mind sharp, clearer than it had been in days. Linda squeezed her shoulder gently before slipping out of the room, giving her space. Emma turned toward the window, resting one hand on her belly. The baby kicked again, strong and sure. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma smiled. It was small. It was tired. But it was real. The world outside continued on, unaware. Cars hissed along wet streets. Strangers hurried with umbrellas. But inside that tiny hospital room, something had shifted. Emma Carter was not broken. She was rebuilding. Quietly, steadily, with every breath she took. The soft beeping of the heart monitor kept time with the rain outside, a steady rhythm that matched the new, stubborn hope blooming inside her chest. She didn't need to scream for help anymore. She had become her own rescue. The first headline broke just 2 weeks after Emma signed the legal documents. It wasn't a small article buried on some blog. It was plastered across major outlets, flashing across television screens and buzzing through social media feeds. Millionaire abandons pregnant wife during medical emergency. Faces lawsuit for medical negligence and emotional distress. Beneath the bold print, a still image from the hospital security footage showed Ryan Foster standing stiffly, arms crossed, while Emma crumpled to the ground beside him. The video clip, only 30 seconds long, had already been watched over 10 million times. The lawsuit, filed by Emma's newly assembled legal team, hit harder than anyone expected. It wasn't just about abandonment. It outlined detailed allegations of medical neglect, public endangerment, and intentional emotional abuse. Emma's lawyers didn't just attack Ryan's actions that day. They exposed a pattern, painting a damning picture of a man who believed his money could excuse cruelty. Ryan's public relations team scrambled. Press statements were issued, carefully worded apologies drafted, but the damage was already done. News crews camped outside Foster Industries headquarters, cameras clicking furiously every time Ryan's black SUV pulled up. Reporters shouted, questions he ignored, ducking his head against the flash of cameras. Behind closed doors, his world started to unravel. Investors withdrew quietly at first, citing differences in vision. Then louder exits followed, public statements condemning Ryan's behavior and disavowing any association with him. The stock price wobbled, then slid. Whispers of internal, boardroom rebellion leaked to the press. Angry memos surfaced, showing senior executives furious at the exposure, terrified of what it meant for the future of their fortunes. A leaked video from a tense board meeting went viral. Ryan standing at the head of a long, polished table, shouting over furious board members as they demanded accountability, demanded answers he didn't have. The clip ended with one executive slamming a resignation letter onto the table and storming out. Meanwhile, Emma remained quiet, letting her lawyers and the growing tide of public support do the talking. Across social media, hashtags bloomed overnight. Stand with Emma, our justice for Emma, pregnant, not powerless. Women's rights organizations posted statements supporting her. Advocacy groups dedicated to maternal health amplified her story, turning it into a rallying cry for change. Celebrities weighed in. Talk shows dissected every detail, praising Emma's courage, condemning Ryan's coldness. The hospital where Emma had first been abandoned released a statement of its own, a carefully worded apology that subtly pointed fingers at Ryan's influence and hinted at systemic failures. Even Foster Memorial's glossy image couldn't survive the scrutiny. Donations dried up. Community leaders distanced themselves. Linda watched the wave build from the sidelines, quietly proud. She visited Emma often, bringing updates, sitting with her during the slow afternoons when the world outside felt overwhelming. They didn't talk much about Ryan anymore. He was becoming a shadow, shrinking every day while Emma slowly reclaimed her light. The public fundraiser came almost exactly a month after the first headline broke. It wasn't a huge, glamorous event. It was a community fundraiser for maternal health advocacy, held in a sunlit park downtown. Folding chairs, simple banners, homemade cookies sold at plastic tables. Nothing polished, nothing fake. Emma arrived wearing a simple navy dress, her growing belly obvious, but her posture straight and strong. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup soft. There was no sign of the broken woman who had once knelt on a marble floor, begging for help that never came. When she stepped up to the microphone, the small crowd quieted immediately. Cameras flashed from the edges, reporters hungry for another image. But Emma didn't flinch. "I'm not here today because I wanted to be a headline," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here because I realized no one should ever feel invisible. No one should ever feel like their pain doesn't matter, because someone richer or louder decides it's inconvenient." There was a slight quiver in her voice, but she pressed on, her words simple and direct. "Dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you're born with. And no one, not power, not money, not fear, has the right to take it away." The crowd erupted into applause, not polite or restrained, but full-hearted and raw. Emma smiled, blinking quickly to keep the tears at bay. She stepped down from the small platform, shaking hands, accepting hugs from strangers who saw not just a victim, but a survivor. In the background, Linda stood by the refreshment table, watching with quiet pride. She caught Emma's eye across the crowd and gave a small, encouraging nod. Emma returned it, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had fought through together. Somewhere across town, Ryan Foster sat in a sleek, cold office, fielding desperate calls from lawyers and publicists trying to salvage what was left of his empire. His name, once synonymous with luxury and power, was now a punchline, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of other powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. But here, in this small park filled with folding chairs and paper signs, Emma's name was becoming something else entirely. Hope, strength, proof that dignity, once reclaimed, could be louder than any fortune, stronger than any betrayal. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as Emma took the stand. She adjusted the microphone slightly, her hands steady despite the weight of 100 watching eyes. Across the polished floors and gleaming oak benches, reporters scribbled furiously, cameras hidden behind courtroom sketch artists. Ryan sat, stiffly at the defendant's table, flanked by expensive lawyers, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. Emma wore a simple, elegant dress and a small silver necklace. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need theatrics. Her voice when she spoke was calm, measured, and devastating. "I was 29 weeks pregnant when my husband decided my pain was an inconvenience," she said, her tone even. "He told the hospital to cancel medical help. He left me on the floor of the lobby, in front of strangers, begging for assistance while he walked away." She spoke of the contractions, the fear, the helplessness. She spoke of Linda, the only one brave enough to step forward when everyone else looked away. She spoke of the humiliation, the way the world seemed to agree that her pain was unworthy of attention, until the cameras captured it. Each word stripped away another layer of Ryan's carefully crafted image. When Emma finished, the room was silent for several long seconds. Even the judge seemed to pause before nodding for the next witness. Linda was called next. She stepped up nervously, her palms sweaty, but her voice steady, She recounted everything. The order to cancel the nurse, the way Ryan dismissed Emma's obvious distress, the silent pressure from hospital management to look away. She testified that she broke the rules that day, knowing full well the consequences, because she couldn't stand to watch a woman suffer like that. Hospital staff followed, one after another, confirming Linda's story, confirming what the video footage had already made clear. Emma Carter had been treated as disposable by the man who had vowed to protect her. Ryan's lawyers tried to poke holes, tried to suggest exaggeration, misunderstanding. But each time, the evidence stood firm. The video played again on the large courtroom screens. Ryan's cold stance, his dismissive hand wave, Emma collapsing alone. No explanation could erase it. When Ryan was called to testify, his downfall became complete. He bristled at every question, his mask cracking with every attempt to defend himself. He called Emma emotional, unstable, dramatic. He denied telling the administrator to cancel her nurse, even as the court watched footage showing his exact words. By the time closing arguments were made, no one doubted the outcome. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Ryan Foster was found guilty of negligence, emotional endangerment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Financial penalties were severe. Millions in damages, mandatory donations to maternal health organizations, public apologies required by court order. But the financial loss was only part of the judgment. His reputation, once bulletproof, was now radioactive. Board members resigned publicly. Endorsement deals were shredded. His once golden company stocks plummeted further, investors fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. When Ryan stormed out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed like bees. Cameras flashed wildly as he shoved past them, shouting at the questions hurled in his direction. His polished suit was rumpled. His tie hung loose around his neck. Spit flew from his mouth as he barked at the paparazzi, his face twisted in rage and humiliation. The photos would be splashed across every newspaper the next morning. Ryan Foster, from billionaire to breakdown. Inside the courthouse, Emma stood quietly, holding her newborn son close to her chest. The baby, healthy and sleeping peacefully, wore a tiny knitted cap Linda had brought to the hospital the night he was born. Around Emma, a small group of supporters gathered. Lawyers, friends, strangers who had followed her journey and rooted for her silently. As she stepped onto the courthouse steps, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. It wasn't deafening. It wasn't chaotic. It was warm, human, full of the kind of real support that couldn't be bought or faked. Emma smiled gently, blinking, back tears as she adjusted the baby in her arms and moved carefully down the steps. Linda waited near the bottom, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes shining with pride. Emma reached her, and without a word, they embraced, careful not to jostle the sleeping infant between them. Across the street, hidden behind a tinted window of a waiting black car, Ryan watched the scene unfold. His face was pale, drawn tight with bitterness. No cameras captured him now. No one cared anymore. He sat back in his seat, alone, disgraced, forgotten by the world he once ruled. Emma didn't glance in his direction. She didn't need to. The life she carried in her arms, the crowd that celebrated her strength, the fire still burning quietly inside her. They were all the proof she needed that he no longer had any power over her. As Emma walked away from the courthouse, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the crowd. Her battle was over, and she had won. The small gold plaque gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, newly mounted above the entrance of the modest but welcoming brick building. The Open Arms Foundation, below the name, in smaller letters, founded by Emma Carter. The ribbon-cutting ceremony wasn't grand or crowded with celebrities, but it didn't need to be. Local families gathered, some with babies on their hips, others holding toddlers by the hand. Volunteers handed out cupcakes and coffee, while a small string quartet played softly near the steps. Emma stood at the doorway, her son perched confidently on her hip, his tiny hand grabbing at the sparkling scissors she was about to use. Her smile was soft but strong, the kind of smile that came from a place of deep healing, not showmanship. Linda stood just behind her, holding a clipboard and wearing the foundation's simple teal t-shirt, her grin wide and genuine. In the months since the court case had closed, Emma's life had changed completely. Settlement money, combined with an outpouring of donations from strangers touched by her story, had allowed her to purchase a beautiful home with a wide front porch, tall trees lining the yard, and a cozy nursery bathed in soft morning light. But Emma had known from the beginning that the victory couldn't just be personal. She had needed to build something bigger than herself, something that would outlast the noise of headlines and hashtags. The Open Arms Foundation was created for women who had no one to fight for them, women abandoned, mistreated, or silenced during one of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. They would have legal advocates, emotional support groups, emergency shelter, and, perhaps most importantly, the assurance that they were not invisible. Linda had been the first to accept a job offer when Emma reached out. It hadn't been a difficult choice. She left the hospital quietly, refusing to stay in a place that had once taught her that silence was safer than compassion. Now she ran the foundation's operations, coordinating volunteers and making sure no cry for help ever went unanswered. Inside Emma's new home, a box sat tucked under the coffee table, filled with letters. Handwritten notes from strangers, neighbors, even former critics who had judged her during the early media frenzy. Some apologized for doubting her. Others simply thanked her for giving them courage they didn't know they needed. Emma had read every single one, some of them more than once. They lined her spirit on the days when the old pain whispered from the edges of her memory. Today, though, there was no room for whispers. Today was about celebration. Emma adjusted her son on her hip, grinned at Linda, and together they cut the ribbon. Applause rippled through the crowd, warm and human and very real. Inside, the walls were already decorated with artwork from local children. A play area was stocked with toys and books. Quiet rooms were furnished with soft chairs and dim lighting for women who needed a moment of peace. Legal offices had been set up with donated computers and second-hand desks, already busy with intake appointments. Emma spent the afternoon walking through the building, greeting visitors, answering questions, showing young mothers the resources available to them. Every smile she received, every hand she shook, felt like another stitch sewing her heart back together. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Emma sat on a bench outside, rocking her son gently in her arms. Linda joined her, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade. "You did it," Linda said, handing Emma a cup. Emma laughed quietly, shaking her head. "We did it." The baby gurgled sleepily, his tiny hand clutching the fabric of Emma's blouse. From across the street, an old couple waved, smiling widely. Nearby, a young woman cradling a newborn approached, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said simply. Emma smiled and squeezed her hand. As the evening light bathed the brick walls of the foundation in gold, Emma realized she no longer felt the need to look over her shoulder. Ryan Foster was a ghost now, a lesson in what could happen when you believed money could buy your way out of humanity. His empire had crumbled, his name had faded from the front pages. He was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and dinner parties. Emma didn't think of him anymore, not out of anger, out of irrelevance. She had built something lasting, something louder than fear, stronger than abandonment. They left her screaming for help. She built a life where no woman would ever scream alone again. If you felt inspired by Emma's story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful journeys. Every voice matters, and every story deserves to be heard.